Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigus.
Hi everyone and welcome back to the Fly Culture Podcast. I'd like to start again by saying a huge great thank you to everyone who's enjoying the latest edition of Fly Culture magazine. It seems to be going down very, very well. And thank you for all the mentions and shares and everything else. We never ask anyone to do it, and it's deeply touching to do that and to see that as well. So thank you for everyone, and I hope you're enjoying reading the magazine too. My guest today is probably one of the most accomplished people I know with both a single and double-handed rod. He's written 2 books on spey casting, has been at the forefront of spey casting and fly line design, has appeared in fishing and casting videos, has been an instructor, a guide, and having worked with him at fishing shows, I feel qualified to say he's probably one of the nicest people in fly fishing too. It's a great pleasure to have Simon Gawesworth as a guest on today. Mate, it's lovely to have you here. How you doing?
Man, you're right. What a bloody pile of crap. What an intro. It's hilarious, isn't it? I'm great. It's actually early morning here in America, 9:15. So I've roused myself. I haven't had my morning cup of coffee yet, so this might not go correctly until I have that.
Yeah, that's the part of it, is being planned and having all those sorts of bits and pieces ready to get you through. But how's everything going over there, and how are you doing, and how's everything? You've been fishing local, I guess. Yeah,
actually, it's not bad. Over here right now, obviously March, as we talk, 22nd of March, is our winter steelhead season just closed down. So we don't, we have almost the opposite seasons as I did in living in Devon. So winter steelhead season really, there's no official start date, but the fish don't come into the rivers till October in the very smallest runs, a few in November, the odd ones in December, January, February. And my local river closes 15th of March, and then the other local rivers close 15th of April. And so I've actually been on the water a lot this winter because, one of the many, I guess, downsides of COVID is people don't travel. But the plus side of that is that I haven't gone to all the fly fishing shows I normally do. So I've been home all the weekends. And normally I get 1 or 2 days a year in my winter steelhead season because I travel so much. I've had a dozen at least. So it's been brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I haven't caught as many, put it this way, I've caught about as many steelhead in 12 days as I normally do in like 2 days. There's not many about me. I'm out there swinging away and casting and just getting out and swinging. So proper, yeah.
Nice. I know we were talking off mic, and it's the same for me. I've put in the hours so far, and it must be fascinating for me anyway to learn a little bit about how you feel about the fishing that you have there now, comparable to what you were experiencing in Devon. Is it sort of how do you draw any comparisons to it?
Not like a conscious comparison, right? It's you get the steelhead is a 4-season species, right? You can find summer steelhead and autumn steelhead and winter steelhead and spring steelhead. There's few and far between all of them, and you can go to rivers like the Deschutes and you can catch them in July and August and September, and you can get winter and autumn steelhead October, November, December, and then you can go up to the Olympic Peninsula January, February, March. You can fish steelhead all year round, and I liken steelhead to salmon fishing, really. I mean, they're two-handed spey casting, and in the cold waters using sinking lines and heavier flies than you would generally for salmon, and in the Deschutes in July, August, September, using little light, tiny, small flies and scandies. So there's a lot of similarities on that. Don't put me on a spot and say, so what is the better fish, the steelhead or the Atlantic salmon? Because I ain't going to fall for that one, mate. I'm going to piss somebody off with whatever I answer. So I'll just say I love them both because they both get me out on the water.
I'll just get my pen out and cross through that next question. And I guess I've got to join in the congratulations. I see that you've just celebrated 20 years with Rio now.
I have, yeah. God, you're up to date with the news, mate.
I don't miss anything.
No, well, you don't. So, yeah, I joined Rio. Funny old story. My officially start date of Rio was something like January 21, 2001. So, yeah, 20 years. And they usually acknowledge that kind of thing at Christmas parties. And, of course, we didn't have the Christmas party this year because of the COVID thing. And I haven't been up to headquarters, which is on Bainbridge Island up in the northern part, or more northern part of Washington State. I haven't been up there for about 8 months, right, because of COVID and all that stuff. So I went up to meet a new marketing director who started, and I got Zach, my old mate at Rio. He's up there as well. He called me into his room, said he had a problem with his computer, and I walked into this room, and there's all the far bank stuff and all the video monitors, all the people at Rio that I've worked with over the years, and they're all celebrating my 20th anniversary. I was absolutely gobsmacked, mate. I was totally taken by surprise. Didn't know what to say about that. I got presented 5 lovely bottles of gin and a certificate and a beautiful Tide fly. I was so touched. I hadn't a clue. Didn't know what to say. I was actually speechless for about a minute.
That's really cool, isn't it? And really thoughtful as well to mark that occasion. Yeah. I guess over that time, you've seen and been behind some of the changes we've seen in fly fishing in that time. I guess that kind of has been interesting to see. And I guess with the work, with the design of the lines and everything else, that I guess there's a little bit of pride in there too, isn't there?
Very much so, actually. You're dead right. I came into this fly line world at a really good time, in that it was the start of consumer acceptance of right at the very beginning of consumer acceptance of what we'd call specialty lines, rather than the one line does all. You know, I mean, we all started with Cortland 444 Peaches, right? Those are just the core fly lines, and I taught with them and used them all the time. And that line did everything, right? I threw dry flies with it and lures with it and everything else with it. Didn't know those fly lines could be different. Had no clue. And it wasn't until I started at Rio that I started getting this education from Jim, that fly lines were far more important than that. And he really started this trend to specialty lines with the wind cutter line, right? As you said, we're talking off mic, and he mentioned that. And he started this concept. So I was really in the presence of this brilliant fly fishing mind about somebody who really designed fly lines to do special things, and they do these special things so much better. So yeah, I was just there at the right time, mate. That's how it goes sometimes.
Yeah. And it has, like you say, you know, people now even talk to me about the tapers, grain weights and everything else. And that has been a wonderful evolution. I know, having worked as an instructor, how we tried to push the importance of a fly line, and always used to say, let's spend a little less on the rod and a little bit more on the fly line. And it has been really pleasing to see now, isn't there? And like you say, we can equip our arsenal with lines to do so many different things now, can't we? For the fishing the little streams that we fish in Devon, to, like you say, throwing and swinging flies for steelhead in winter.
Yeah, it would be an interesting, I guess we would never know, right? It would have been interesting if lines hadn't evolved along these specialty tapers and had just stayed this way. Would these other fisheries open up? Because, you know, maybe it's too high. I couldn't imagine throwing a double taper line, even a sinking double taper line for a winter steelhead. But if these lines hadn't evolved, and Skagit lines and mow tips and things like that hadn't evolved, then that's what it was. And certainly back in my day for salmon fishing, when you went up, I'd normally go up to the Spey and fish opener, 11th of Feb, on the Spey, and there's all double taper, wet cell 4 sinking lines and sodding great brass tube flies, and they were bare to cast. Would the fisheries have opened up and got more anglers involved if lines hadn't changed? No, I don't think they would have, because it was a bloody struggle. You had to pay your dues to cast those damn things. So I think this is, rightly and wrongly, I think this is a good thing and a bad thing, right? The good thing is that it's made fly fishing easier in all these little disciplines, and therefore more people get into it, because a lot of people don't really want to spend the time learning to cast and learning the subtleties and intricacies of casting and fishing and how an unbalanced rig can be made to work. That takes skill and time. So if you develop a fly line that's pretty easy to cast, a Skagit line for a winter steelhead, well, a lot more people can do it and do it. So it's contributed to the growth of the sport, and that's just down to the design of a fly line. And certainly back in the day when I joined Rio, you would never have guessed that a fly line would have so much influence, or a fly line's design would have so much influence on the sport.
Yeah, and like you say, the wing cutter really, certainly, you know, I have them in trout lines and in salmon lines as well, and the ability to cast the line, like you say, so much more easily, really was a game changer. And was that the first product that actually came out of the Rio stable?
First fly line, yes. Yeah, so Rio started about 1990 officially in with they had hunting logs from fishing journals, that kind of thing, waterproof labels. They had a little fly cassette winding kit for fly line winder type thing. They had some hand-tied leaders. So when Jim and Kitty started the company, they started with niche little products like that. They sourced a monofill called Powerflex, and that still is our best-selling tippet, and that was one of their early things. So before they even got into fly lines, it was little nichey things like that, and they got into fly shops with bits and pieces. And Jim, when he wanted to get into fly lines, he decided to create. I mean, he and all the steelhead cronies that were around in those days and his buddies were chopping up double taper lines and creating wind cutter-esque lines. And he just said, well, if we're creating them and we see how much easier, we should make these and sell them. And so in about 96, I guess, Rio started. They actually contacted a company, had another fly line company making the designs of these wind cutter lines. So those were the first lines. And then a couple of years later, Jim decided just to bite the bullet and buy the machinery to build the fly lines, rather than get stuck with delays and changing prices. And so he started off by building fly lines and then never looked back.
Wow. And that process, even if we took it from then, but even transferred it to now, that process of development of a fly line, how long does that actually take?
That's an interesting question. And I'm going to answer that with a depends. It depends on, like, you can use examples of emerging fisheries. For example, it wasn't that long ago when really there wasn't many people who would go down to South America to target peacock bass and dorado and things like that. They'd go to South America for the sea run brown trout because that had been a fishery for 40 odd years, but targeting peacock bass in big numbers and traveling down there. And so that fishery has emerged fairly recently. And as a result, we have fairly recently found a demand for people traveling down there for a line that does things. For it's got to be a tropical coated line. It's a freshwater fishery. It's throwing big flies. It's a river, so you need floating running lines to be able to mend. So there's attributes that make a line successful down there. And 15 years ago, people didn't do that, so there was no thought of creating a line. So sometimes they evolve because fisheries open up. Sometimes they evolve because, like the Skagit lines evolved because we talked to a bunch of, we had a bunch of our Rio ambassadors who were creating their own Skagit lines, and people were using them when they were being guided by these guys, Mike and Scott. I'm sure you know those guys, Scott O'Donnell, Mike McCune, Ed Ward. They kind of made these Skagit lines, and when Jim and I went over and fished with them, then they showed us these lines, and we just started creating them with their permission, and out came Skagit lines. So lines like that evolve because they've already been tweaked to a point where they're homemade good, but not manufactured good. So it's a pretty easy step. But then when you come onto lines, like when we came out with the first intermediate-based Skagit line, right? We already had a floating Skagit line. Then we came out with a Skagit line called an I-Flight. And the I-Flight had an intermediate body and a floating back end so you could mend it. And I tell you what, that was a process that went through, if I remember right, it was either 14 or 15 different prototypes before we got it right. Because what we hadn't realized at the time, it was in the early days of multi-density fly lines. It's not been that long in the history of fly lines where companies can create lines with different densities all in the same thing without physically welding them together, right? And in earlier days, you used to get a floating piece and a sinking piece and be able to weld it together to create a sinking tip. Well, with some manufacturing processes, you can't do that. And it's also not ideal to just weld two bits of line together. You want that core running through a center. So in the early days of that, we hadn't understood that when you use a more dense material, the fly line diameter gets thinner for the same grain weight, and you get a little hinge point, and anyway, for numerous reasons, lines like that, which you think is a very easy thing to do because you've already got a Skagit line built, floater, that thing took probably 18, 16 months to get right before it was a satisfactory line to cast. And in the end, it actually cast better than the floater. But that one took a blooming long time. So some of them do take a seriously long process to get right in terms of just tapers. And then some of them, as I said, are kind of based on prototypes that people have made, and they've kind of tweaked it and they've got the designs semi right, and we just finish them off.
Because I kind of think, if I think back, some of the spay lines that you've worked with, be it the Skagits or whatever, you really worked hard on where the weight or the mass would sit within the D as well, didn't you? And where that was going to sit within there. And that must have been a really time-consuming, yet I guess geeky but fascinating process as well.
Yeah, very fascinating, actually, especially for a casting geek like me. I mean, I reveled in it. I love working on that kind of stuff because I love casting, and so, as you say, working on where in the D loop the maximum weight is. There's a unofficial unit of measure in fly lines, which is the grains per foot, right? And it just basically, when you look at a fly line, you can have 3 fly lines this length, and all 3 of them can weigh a kilogram, for just an example, but one of them could have 900 grams of weight here, and this bit be 100 grams, and one of them could have 900 grams here, and this bit be 100, and one of them could be even 1,000 grams, and so they all have the same length and they all have the same weight, but where the weight is, what's called the weight distribution, plays an enormous role in the end result of the line, and that's I really got super fascinated into that once I started learning that from Jim and Marlin and the guys at Rio.
And that's a really interesting insight too, because it's not like just let's bring a new line to the market. There's a deep understanding, but also the process behind it, and not rushing something that, well, it might kind of do the job, but there's obviously a determination to get that right, isn't there? And make sure that when that comes to market, and I guess, like you say, with the ambassadors, with your pro staff, everything else, there's that process of people trying the line, giving you the feedback and all that stuff before that comes to market. So it's not just sort of rocking up, casting it in the car park and saying, yeah, we think that's kind of cool. There's a hell of a lot more goes to it, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. And to be honest, it's one of the main reasons that we have pro staff and ambassadors is, they live on the certain fisheries. We have pro staff in Florida who live on tarpon fisheries, and the Carolinas that live on and go to and guide in Mexico. So they have the Mexico fisheries, and they have the tuna and the albacore fisheries and striped bass fisheries, and we have steelhead and salmon. We have ambassadors across all the spectrums, because we can't, even if we can generally justify a job by going to only fish and test all these lines by just going fishing around it, you can't spend enough time in the fishery as a local person who's guiding 220 days a year on that fishery. So it's great to have people like that and get the feedback from them. And our ambassadors are very, very good casters, very knowledgeable people, and we rely on them to give us some good feedback, and they've done that over the course of time. So we'll always sit down with the design, like the peacock bass fishery idea I was telling you about, or the product. We'll sit down with a concept. Somebody from Rio, myself, Marlin, Chris, Wayne, Zach, somebody from Rio will go down to that fishery and start fishing it with what there is and seeing what's involved and taking notes about. And then you come back with these notes. It must cast big flies. It must have a floating running line to mend. It must be a sinking head because you want to get down for these fish. It must be a fast sinking head. It must be a short head. We'll take notes and create these designs and then farm them off to our pro staff to fish them, or go off on another trip and test them that way. So there is a process that goes. And I'm sure Rio's not the only one. I know Rio because obviously I work for Rio. I'm sure all line companies go through the same thing. Certainly the main ones, the big ones that actually physically make lines. And there's not many, a lot of people don't know that there's very few companies that physically and actually make the fly lines. We'll make a lot of OEM lines, which are, I never knew what OEM stood for, but basically we're making lines for other companies. And so you can get a lot of line companies out there that don't make fly lines, and they'll have a different testing process. So we'll make a fly line for somebody, and it's down to them to test the tapers, right? Rather than us to design it and test it and tweak it and refine it. That's their onus. But for the Rio lines, we have a very, very structured process of testing and trying to get it right. And sometimes we do.
And I guess, so when we see that product come to market, there's been a lot of time and a lot of money spent in developing that fly line, hasn't there? So there is a lot of investment gone into that. And of course, you guys make your own fly lines as well, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah, so our facility is still there in Idaho Falls, which is where I first moved to when I came over to America back in '01. We still make all our fly lines there, whether they're the cheapest lines or the most expensive lines, they're still made there. And then our central head office, if you like, and warehousing, that's up on Bainbridge Island, Washington. And so everything we make, we just ship up there and it's warehoused and sent out to guide fly fishing and to our distributors and dealers around the world.
It's funny, I was on a trip to the Midwest with my daughter, and we ended up I said, we're going to go and see if we can find Simon. We were on the road and we saw Great Falls, Idaho, so we drove round there and had absolutely zero chance of finding you. But we had a drive round, because it's bigger than I was expecting it to be as well. And we sort of drove around there, but had no idea. And I said, well, we might be able to go and knock at the door if we could find you, but never did, and ended up somewhere else. And of course, crossed over, I think it was Henry's Fork on the way there, if I remember rightly, and had to pull over and watch a few rising, but I wouldn't leave until I'd seen a fish rise. So we did that, but we traveled all over the place. And yeah, we tried to find you, not in a weird way or stalkery way, but we thought it'd be kind of nice to see if we could drop in and find you.
Mate, that would have been brilliant. Yeah. Yeah, that was Idaho Falls, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. How long ago was that?
5-6 years ago.
Okay, so I moved from there 7 years ago. So depending on what year it was, it might have been still there. But yeah, there was. It's funny. Had you found us and come up to Rio and had been there, and we'd have gone in and no doubt had a coffee or a beer in the office, and there's no way you would ever have had a chance to look at the fly line machinery. I wish you could, because it is brilliant to see the fly line machinery, but it is so top secret that nobody goes into that. None of our reps ever go in there. None of our dealers go in there. Our distributors, nobody goes into it. So it'd have been brilliant to have seen you and had a natter, but we couldn't have shown you the fly line machinery, which would have been amazing for you to see, just to see how these things come off. Yeah, that would have been awesome to see, mate. We could have hit the Henry's Fork and had a little float.
I tell you, that would have been fantastic. We tried, I can't even remember if we even just turned round and came back. We were staying in West Yellowstone at the time. So I think we headed back again, if I remember rightly now. I can't quite remember. But then we went there, and then we ended up going down the Madison or something like that, I think, after that. But we just drove round, didn't look anything. It was just an amazing trip for all the right reasons.
God, what a beautiful area, though. West Yellowstone, that's... did you fish the lake there, Hedgen?
No, I didn't. I fished the river in the park. I fished many of the streams, I have to say. So, we wandered around there. But because my daughter sort of fishes, I fished the Gallatin in the park as well. And my daughter caught some fish on the Gallatin. She's not as passionate an angler as she used to be, so she sort of picked up a rod and had a little bit of a go around there. And then we just sort of went all over the place and floated the Yellowstone and did all sorts of stuff. And it just lends itself to a road trip and fishing really, really well.
Oh, what a cracking area that is, mate! I love that area. Really, I mean, especially as a trout angler, it's very, very, very good. Yeah. Not New Zealand.
So let's
good.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, we're going to go down a wormhole there with that one. But I thought what I'd do is take you back to your life where it sort of started in fishing here. And I wanted to ask you if we went back to the beginning, I guess it was inevitable that your life would be actually shaped by fly fishing, wouldn't it?
Inevitable. No other option. Well, almost an option. I almost became an Air Force pilot, but thankfully I didn't.
Yeah. And so life started in Kent, but you moved down to Devon, and it's a wonderful story. And I've touched on it a little bit before, because for me, who was running a sort of a guide and instruction business, I think the business your dad had and then you subsequently ran was an amazing one. And I thought it would be really interesting for people to learn about how that was packaged together. Because again, we talked about you being at the forefront of so many things currently, but also then as well. It seemed to me that the model that you had for the business was just way ahead of anything else that was going on out there.
Well, yes. I mean, that was my dad, right? He started a fly fishing school in Kent. Well, as you correctly said, I was born in Kent, in Tunbridge Wells, and we lived in actually quite near Buell, where Buell is now. But Buell opened the year we left, sadly, so I never got to fish Buell when I was living there. It would have been brilliant because we were about 3 miles from Buell. And we moved down to Devon in 1970s. How did we move to Devon? That's a blank. Is it 77 or is it? Yeah, it was 77. Yeah, that's right. 77. Moved down to Devon in 77, August 26th, 77. And my dad had started the fly fishing school in 72 in Kent. And so we had a bit of established school. And he wanted to move to Devon because in Kent we really only had lake fishing available. And his passion for fly fishing developed up in North Wales in Conway. And so he used to fly fish there, and he loved rivers. And so he always wanted, once the school got established and became fairly successful, and there wasn't many schools around in those days, honestly, fly fishing schools or instructors. And once it got to a point where he wanted it established, he wanted it to move down to where there was some trout fishing and some salmon fishing. And that's why we chose Devon, to be honest. And again, it was nothing to do with me. I was 12 at the time of the consideration and 13 when we got down there. And he built up this structure of courses, and we had some brilliant courses. I miss those days, actually, mate. They were brilliant. They were just so good. They were so well thought out. He was always a teacher. So before he became a fly fishing instructor, he taught maths and physics at schools and at colleges and things like that. So he'd always taught. So he understood curriculums, and being a maths and physics teacher, he understood a lot. He was well ahead of the game in terms of understanding teaching and also actually understanding the physics of casting and rod flex, and came up with a whole bunch of great stuff. And taught me amazing. I was just in awe of it. I just loved fishing. I didn't want to do anything else. Once I got down to Devon, that was it. I just wanted to be a fly fishing instructor and work with my dad, and it worked out brilliantly.
Yeah. And that model you had as well involved accommodation. It included food. It was just such a clever idea to actually have everything. So you had everyone under the roof, and I could imagine the evenings must have been kind of fun where everyone's talking about the day and what's happened. And that was just such a clever idea to those add-ons that were natural add-ons, weren't they? That people could come stay, they could have something to eat and everything else that went with it too.
That was, I was 13 when I got there, and I left school at Torrington High School, secondary school. I guess I was 16, I think, when I left school, and just started working with my dad at the time. And by then he'd set up this structure. So when we moved to Devon, he bought a large Georgian house in Torrington, and it had 4 guest rooms, and people would come down and stay with us. And so we would offer these residential fly fishing courses. And so, yeah, he would get the income from obviously the residency and dinner and full board, bed and breakfast. And in the evenings, we would have fly tying classes, entomology classes. We would have lectures and things like that. And it was a wonderful way of, it was so forward thinking with Dad. He also, believe it or not, way back in the early 80s, he bought video cameras and was videoing people. And we'd sit down in the evenings and analyze the video and go over the video and pause and look at the mistakes and had video analysis. And that was so far ahead of the time in the very early 80s when he started doing that. I still remember the bloody thing was a monster of a camera to carry around, and a sodding great box that was the recorder with buttons, 2 buttons you push down. And the box was about 15 pounds, 17 pounds, and a sodding great box like this with huge batteries and blimey, lugging that bugger around. But that was what it was. That was what technology was in those days. So, but yeah, and then when he sold you might have the questions about that, but when he retired in 1990, and he and my stepmom retired, they'd evolved through a couple of different properties, getting bigger properties, moved from this Georgian house to a beautiful hotel. I think it was 13 bedrooms, might be 14 bedrooms. Hotel, just a gorgeous hotel on the banks of the River Torridge. And that's an even bigger step up because that's a hotel. So then you have guests coming down to the gardens at Rosemore. They would stay in the hotel because it's half a mile from there. He did shooting classes and courses and driven bird games and game stuff like that, and that became a huge thing. Restaurants and bar service. And so when he retired, I didn't have the money to take that over. So they sold that. That was their retirement, and I just retained the fishing school. And the whole point of this ramble is that when I bought the fishing school from him, then the accommodation and meal side stopped, and I got in touch with the local pubs, and a couple pubs say, we'll put your guests up here and give you a 10% commission, something like that. And finally, I found one place that built me a little lecture facility and built me a fishing shop. And I could use that if the guests stayed at their pub. And so I lost that kind of income, but you have to have a lecture facility, and it was nice to have a bit of a shop to sell bits and bobs. And then I just earned the money from the tuition in those days.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fascinating one. You talk about the teaching part of it as well, because as somebody when I started, I worked for Nick, who worked for you, and the teaching of the cast and the way that you teach has been passed down. And it's kind of cool that there's so many people have worked for you that have been in the industry, and the effect that you've probably had out through the fishing industry is very far reaching, I would guess. Again, that's something else you must be incredibly proud of. Very.
Again, I mean, it's nothing to do with me, really. It's my dad hired all these people. I did hire Nick for sure. And I'd known Nick obviously for a long time before that, and always respected the young man. He always had a passion for the fly fishing side. It was brilliant to work with him. But before that, my dad hired Robbie Winram, right, who works up at Rutland now, and Robin Elwes, who works over at in Farlow's, and Robin Gow, who worked. I don't think he does. He used to work with Orvis there, and then Rich Ticehurst. He's lived in Plymouth. I don't think Rich does much in the fly fishing world now, but there's some really big names that my dad taught up as kids, and they were 18, 20-year-old kids, and he taught them fly fishing and fly casting and teaching, and some of these people have just stayed in the industry and passed on their knowledge. And I look at that and go, bloody hell, that's amazing. That had so much influence. And then he started up a tournament casting club, in Torrington, and got a bunch of kids involved. And some of those kids became world casting champions, world junior casting champions. And he trained these kids up. And he had such an influence on people who were my kind of age. And at the time, I didn't think anything of it because I was a kid and these were just other kids. But they're in the industry and they're talking about it, promoting it. And it's just fascinating, mate. Fascinating.
Yeah. And spending time, I guess, with your dad as well, developing casting, working, like you say, with distance casting. The snake roll came from the Torridge, I think, wasn't it? Which is a Devon River. I always say it's a Devon cast. So, it's must have been an amazing time to be developing this sort of stuff in a largely was seen as a traditional marketplace, but you're actually shaking stuff up a bit and developing stuff and just being streets ahead of what I would guess was going on in the UK at the time.
Well, I think, if you're a successful teacher, you've got to be able to break things down in numerous ways, right? You obviously know it from your teaching days is you can't just have one dialogue to teach a double haul or a snake roll or a spay cast, because whilst it worked with one person, the next person have no clue what you're talking about. So you develop that and you break things down. And again, through my dad's influence, he taught me to really analyze it. And that was mostly from my tournament casting days. It's funny how these things evolve when you compete competitively for casting, and you really need to be as good a caster as you possibly can. You start going down to the most ridiculously finest points to try and get an extra half an inch casting distance, and you constantly change your casting techniques and trying to find something that gives a little bit more power, more distance, more efficiency, whatever it is. And then if you combine that side with your instructional side, and the urge to teach and therefore break down a cast to teach successfully, he came up with an awful lot of great stuff that people had never considered before, and technologies and terminologies and things like that. Not technologies, terminology in casting. And then I learned that, and I try to apply that in my casting these days, and analyze things, and come up with terms that somehow, I guess it's lucky when you write the books and you mention the books, there's not a lot of books on spey casting, so when I write something down in a book, somehow that gets into the spey casting world and becomes a bit more of a terminology, a bit more of a what do they call them, like whatever it is, a standard term for it. And so I applied that, and I put that in the books and things like that in my videos. And because I teach a certain way and we're using certain terms, I apply those terms in books and videos. And some of those have become more mainstream and other teachers use them. And I look at that, and every time I hear people using those terms, I go, I can't believe that's amazing that people are actually taking the same terms as me. It's quite flattering because it obviously means something. It's pretty humbling when people are using a term that you've come up with.
And it must be, with the books, and having read the double-handed book when that first came out, it sometimes as a former instructor, that I see people explain stuff and I think, I don't understand it myself, and get too complicated. Yet with the books, when I looked at those, and it's always in my mind the double spey where you're explaining that, for example, that it just makes perfect sense. It's not over technical, yet it explains how to manage and execute the cast. Has that always been a conscious decision not to wrap stuff in deep explanations?
No, I mean, it's evolved that way. But as a brash 18-year-old kid, when I was teaching fly fishing, I was always thinking, this is the way you teach. This is the way you should learn. This is the way you should cast. I never considered, and I don't what really, I guess just experience and time and teaching numerous people opened your mind to believe. And let me finish my thought, I guess. Open your mind to believe there's other ways of teaching, and then and you should have an open mind. But I'm staggered that I still see, I watch YouTube videos on casting because I'm still a casting nut, and I'll read articles in magazines about them, and some of them are just so diuretic and so full of rhetoric, and so down the line, this is the way, and some of them don't make any sense at all. I've moved beyond that. I like to think I've moved beyond that, and I think most people do. When you've taught enough people and you understand that there's so many ways of learning, that hopefully you don't get into that. I mean, I remember Hugh Fulkers's book, his spey casting, right? So I read his book and I studied it very carefully as a student of spey casting. And when I read it now, it was so dogmatic about this and that, and you must do this, and there's no other way. And it's whilst that works for some people, it doesn't work for everybody. So again, I think you just evolve, and I've learned to believe that I don't know everything. I know I don't know everything, and there's a lot more to learn, and there's a lot more to teach, and a lot more ways to teach, and I like learning more ways to teach. Funny enough, I've been coming up with a new term I've been working on my last 2 years of spey casting and teaching, and this new term is now so bloody obvious. I can't understand why I haven't thought about it before. I'm sure other people talk about it, but when I teach it now, it's an additional thing that now so many people go, that is the clearest thing you ever done. And so again, when you have these little light bulb moments of imaginary things, like there's a box, I use an image of a box in spey casting now, where the line lands, and people see that box and go, that's so obvious, that box is so simple. And before I thought of it, I hadn't utilized that. Again, other people might have, but I hadn't come across it. So that, again, there's just steps, and you're constantly evolving things, constantly learning new ways to teach and better ways to teach, I hope.
Yeah, I like that. And we're seeing that I've touched on it before in other podcasts, that we're seeing this now in a wider sphere in sports, psychology, coaching, whatever it is. There's no reason why that can't be applied to flycasting either, can it?
Absolutely not. No reason at all. And a lot of it's obviously spreading around a lot easier because as simple as social media is, it's so much easier to access stuff, whatever your sport is, and to really research it and find the people you connect with online. Right? I subscribe. I'm trying to play the guitar, right, and learning the guitar. And so there's three people I subscribe to that I just listen to all their lessons, and I've watched 25 other people, and I don't like their style and their explanations and the way they teach. And so you find the people you deal with, whether it's music or whether it's casting or whether it's golf or whatever it is. As you say, there's certainly a lot more information to be found anyway these days that wasn't available when I was learning and as a kid.
Yeah. So you worked with the fishing school, and then you were guiding in South America for 4 months as well, and then went to work for Sportfish when they opened the store in Field just outside Reading. Was that kind of a natural sort of progression? I guess life was changing a little bit for you, and then how did that all come about?
Well, that's a very good question. So just rewind. When I had my fly fishing school and took it over from my dad, there was the season, right? We have a Devon season, which was usually 1st of March for salmon, 15th of March for trout, and then going on to 30th of September. And then you had a bit of fishing in the lakes. So really, I had this teaching season, and then I had winters without teaching. And in those winters, the first 6 years or whatever it was, after I bought the school from my dad had the hotel. So as a hotel, he had all income all year round with the hunting and the accommodation. So my winter income dried up, and so in the winter I just got local jobs in Torrington that just tided me over until teaching season. And so I worked in petrol stations and at the cashier. I worked in hotels. I worked in a wedding album factory in Torrington scraping leather. I worked in some awful shithole of a factory that painting metal brackets. The worst job I've had in my entire life. I had to stand in a little box for the entire shift, 3 foot by 3 foot, for the entire shift, just unloading brackets that came onto on a conveyor belt and then loading them up again. Horrible thing. So I did nasty little things like that in the winter just to pay me mortgage. And then I was a consultant for Frontiers, and Frontiers is an American travel company, but they had a London office, and I was a bit of one of the fly fishing consultants for them. And I was at this awful paint factory job. And I've been only there about 4 weeks, I think, or 3 weeks. And I got this phone call from Tarquin at Frontiers and said, we're setting up a guided lodge facility in Argentina in this place called Tierra del Fuego in a river called the Rio Grande. And it's a small lodge, and we've got 2 Argentinian guides. We want a British guide there because we're only going to send British people down, and we want to have a British person down there. Would you have any interest in guiding for enormous sea trout? And I said, God damn yes, let me not think about that. Let me quit my paint job immediately. And so for the next 3 years, I would go down, and my winter job was going down to Argentina and guiding for sea trout, sea brown browns as they called them. So I did that for 3 seasons. And then in 98, that came to an abrupt halt when I got married. And quite rightly, my wife said, when we get married, as your girlfriend and your fiance, you can go down to Argentina for 3 months and work and come back because you're making money. I understand that. But when you get married, I'd rather you didn't go away for 3 to 4 months of when we're married. And I understood that. And I know Jim Vincent. He was the owner of Rio at the time, and Rio was a relatively new company, and not into fly lines or anything like that at the time. They're not making fly lines, just getting into it. But anyway, I had gone over to America and taught spey casting classes with Jim every now and then. Jim had got interested in spey casting, and so I would fly over with him, and we would teach him schools. So for about 2 or 3 years, I would teach these schools with Jim. So I got to know him. And we were having a natter on the phone one day, and I said, I know what I'm going to do, Jim, because my wife's told me to stop guiding and got to find a winter job. And he said, yeah, you fancy coming to America and working for me? And I said, well, let me talk it over with my wife. And there was a lot to be said. It was new roots. We were freshly married. It was a new idea and a new lifestyle. So I went over the first winter just to see what it was like, because he said the first thing, if you do decide to come, is you've got to come and live in Idaho in the winter, because it's shitty. It's so cold and it's snowy, and a lot of people don't like it. So come and work for us for a winter. So I did that, and that was okay. Kind of survived that, and so my wife and I actually moved over to America in November '99, the first time, and I started working with Jim in November '99. And cut a long story short, our work visa got refused from technicalities, and so we got a notice in the post from the powers that be that said you've got 30 days to leave America. And so like, oh crap, we just moved our entire life here, all our furniture's here, we've been here a few months, maybe 6 months in a job. What the hell are we going to do? And at the time, I'd been good friends with Rich and Philip and Anne Parkinson, who owned Sportfish at the time. And again, I was just having a natter with those guys, and they said, well, if you're coming back, we'd love to have you. We're starting up this new facility in Thiel. We'd love to have you as an instructor to come down there and work for us. And so it fell into place. We moved back within 30 days, and instead of going back to Devon, we rented a house in Thiel, and for the next 6 or 7 months, I worked at Thiel in the shop there and teaching and doing courses and classes and things like that. And then when we got the work visa accepted, then in '01, I moved back, January '01, moved back to America to Rio. And that was always the plan, was to work with Sportfish until I got my work visa and then come back here to work for Rio. So that's kind of how it evolved, mate.
Wow. That must have been, a little bit stressful. But I guess, because would it have been difficult for your wife as well, that going there, coming back again, that you could suddenly think, actually, I'm missing this a little bit, or you'd both sort of decided, right, when our visa comes through, then we go and that's all fine. That was a really straightforward process, was it?
Well, yes and no. I mean, the plan was to work for Rio for 3 years and just do a 3-year thing. I mean, we're both very British. She's from Scotland. She's a Scottish lass. I'm English, obviously. And I'm passionately English. I'm vehemently English, and I still am. And so the plan was to work for 3 years and then move back. And that obviously never transpired. After 3 years, our work visa turned into a green card. And in the process of America and immigration, on a work visa, I was allowed to work, but I could only work for the person who was my employee, right? So Rio. So if I left Rio, I had to move back to England, right? Because my work visa got cancelled. My wife wasn't allowed to work because I was there on the work visa. She was allowed to be there because she was married to me. Chloe, our daughter, was born in Thiel when we were over there. And so likewise, so she could live in a house and live in America because under my work visa. And then after 3 years, if we wanted to stay, the work visa expired and we had to get a green card. So the three of us got a green card, and we have to renew that every 10 years. If that's our period of time, we can stay for 10 years under a green card. And that opens up boundaries, right? So then I don't have to work for Rio. I can work for anybody. My wife can get a job because she has a green card. My daughter can get a job because she can get a green card. And so once we got this green card, we thought, well, we'll stay a bit longer. I'm enjoying working for Rio. And I really was working for Rio in the heyday of that fly line design thing we were talking about, and the expansion of fly line. It was a very exciting world, and developing new tapers and just learning about stuff. And I really didn't want to come back. I did massively miss my fly fishing schools in Devon. I am a teacher at heart, and I love teaching. And the best part of my job for me at Rio is still the teaching. Right now, it's evolved to videos. I have to present videos for Rio. I love doing that because I love sharing my knowledge and teaching. I do a number of schools for fly shops that are in and around the US, and I come over to the UK, as you know, for guide events, for guide fly fishing events. And so my best part of my job is always still going to be involved with the teaching side. as well, of course, as the product testing trips. I have to say, I do like my product testing trips.
Yeah.
I don't get to do so much of those now. Unfortunately, we have a newish 3 years kid, Chris, and Chris is fantastic designer, absolutely brilliant whiz kid, mad keen fly fisherman. So he does most of the product testing trips. I wangle one or two every now and then, but he does most of those. So I try and retain my education side in Rio as much as I can, because I just love that. And whilst I enjoy that, I don't particularly want to come home. I do struggle to think whether I'll be here in the US in 5 years, 10 years, or whether I'll be back home and teaching again. I don't know yet. But whilst I'm enjoying my job, I'm certainly going to stay over here. I love the lifestyle. I love the lifestyle in America, right? I love the fact that I can go to my local river and fish it. I don't have to get permission from anybody. I don't have to get a day ticket from anybody. I can go to my local lake and take a boat, row across to an island, set up a tent, camp on that for 3 or 4 days, float around in my boat and go fishing. I bought a Washington State license because I live here, which is $27 for a year. And for that amount of money, I can fish anywhere. It's brilliant, right? Where I don't particularly relish the idea of going back to the UK and having all the constraints of having day tickets and not having your own waters. But then again, the plus side of that is when steelhead season's on and steelhead in the river, you're competing with 100 anglers to try and catch those steelhead, because everybody can go there. Whereas when you've got your own bit, like when I own that little bit of Bray, which you obviously know really well, it's all to yourself. So there's pros and cons. There's not some people say, oh, you live in a perfect spot. And some people say, oh, you've left the perfect spot. There isn't a perfect spot. You have to embrace where you are and make use of and take advantage of what you can. And I don't mind whether I live in America or the UK. I still follow all British sports, right? I'm still a huge rugby and cricket fan, obviously. And I don't understand the basketball and the baseball and the American football things. I haven't embraced those enough to really be a fan of those sports. And I still love me Marmite and me proper cheeses and proper beers. God, I love me proper beers. None of the fizzy, gassy stuff and cold crap that's over here. Although I'm kind of in the area of growth of these microbreweries, right? There's a lot of good microbreweries putting out good beers now. So I can stay a bit longer whilst these good beers and good gins and decent cheeses are coming about.
Nice. I was going to come back to, because it's clear for anyone listening and knowing you as I do, that how passionate you are about the teaching. And it must have been fascinating, those early, particularly, I remember the Rio DVDs that you did with spey casting and seeing that growth, and where, as you said, that you do the days at fly shops, and it may have been spey curious people early on, and now you may go and do something somewhere or other. And I assume, be it the spey clave or whatever it is, in my mind, I assume there's now many great numbers of people wanting to watch you talk about spey casting. You must have seen some amazing changes there.
Well, I have. And again, I mean, a lot of this, life is full of paths. I always say these paths. And a lot of these paths are influenced by who you meet. I was very lucky to meet Jim Vincent. Meeting Jim Vincent took me to Rio. Meeting Tarquin at Frontiers at a fishing show once took me to become work for Frontiers, which took me down to Tierra del Fuego into Argentina. And so you meet these people, and they have these unknown influences in your future life, these unknown paths by the people you meet. And I've obviously completely gone off the track of what your question was, because I completely forgot. Where the hell did I go with that? I have no idea.
Oh, it was good. I was going with it.
I had a deliberate point. So DVDs,
spey classes and numbers.
Spey classes, yeah. So what was really funny, and I still find this humorous in some aspects, and again, it's about the people you meet, is that when I moved to America from the UK, I was never known in the UK for anything outside the trout world. I'd competed in events, in European and World Championships, and I'd written a bunch of articles in magazines, and I taught a little bit of spey casting, but it was always, everything was 99% trout fishing, the reservoir fishing, trout rivers, trout casting, a little bit of fishing for bass and mackerel. I'd kind of started doing that on the Devon coast. That was early days. Not many people were doing that. And then what took me to America was Jim Vincent. And Jim took me to America to work for Rio because he was really passionate about this spay, and he saw this potential of spay. And so we made these DVDs together. We wrote this spay booklet that was in all the Rio fly lines back in the day of spay casting. And I had actually met when I was in guiding in Tierra de Fuego, I had met an American author down in I think it was at Cowtapen, one of the lodges I guided at, called Tom McGuane. And Tom McGuane he's a wonderful author. I don't know if you read his stuff, but he's just God, what a great author, super person. Anyway, he came down to fish, and I was showing him some spay casting with him there, and he said, "Simon, you do this really well. You should write a book about it." And he encouraged me to write this book. And anyway, to cut a long story short, for some unknown reason, I wrote a book at spay casting at the similar time as coming out with these DVDs on spay casting, and suddenly I started being known as a spay casting person and not a trout person. And in America, even to this day, not many people, well, perhaps now a bit because of all the videos I do, but not many people knew me for anything, didn't know I could fish for trout or whatever. You've caught trout? You fish for trout? Oh, we always thought you were the spay guy. So I had these little windows. I had the British window of the trout man and the American window of the spay man, and they never really got together until this series of videos came out for Rio about 5 years ago, and now I'm a bit more known for a bit of everything, really. And I love everything. As I tell anybody, I don't care what I fly fish for. I just want to be out fly casting. I would never pick up a spinning rod, not that I diss a spinning rod or a worming rod, because I enjoy my fly fishing, my casting so much that if I could catch 100 trout on a spinning rod or with a worm and nothing on a fly, I wouldn't. I've caught enough trout. I don't need to catch a trout. I love my casting. And so I just want to go fly casting. I don't care if it's for trout or carp or steelhead or salmon. I just let me out there with a fly rod and keep me fly fishing somehow, because that's my passion.
Nice. Love that. Now, I know
as it is yours.
Yeah, absolutely. I just still shake like a small child with excitement when I go fishing every single time. Yeah. That moment will never leave me, I don't think. It's too deeply entrenched, and it means so much for so many reasons that, I'll never tire of it ever, ever, ever. And, I've been out casting this morning as well, just playing around and every aspect of it. Our lives, isn't there? Our lives just revolve around it. And I think about it. If there's rain falling, what impact's that going to have? Everything revolves around the fishing, and I love that. So long may that continue. But I know you're incredibly busy. I know you've got to go to a meeting now. So I just wanted to start tying stuff up a little bit now. And so ask you a question. How does fly fishing feel to you right now in 2021?
The sport of?
Yeah.
Well, I think fly fishing is in a really good place. I think. I got to say, it's funny, I had this conversation with somebody writing a magazine article 2 days ago, and it was all about social media influencers. And over here, there's a bunch of social media people who endorse products, right? And companies go to these people because they have 100,000 people following them on Instagram, and you should push our rod because there's 100,000 people would be looking at that. I think that's a little bit shallow on that. But what I think is really good is that the social media has created an awfully big following. Fly fishing is absolutely a growing sport, and it's growing in the right demographics. It's growing in youth and with ladies far quicker than anything else, and I think that's fabulous. I just think that is a perfect solution for fly fishing. And of course, the pandemic thing helped immensely fly fishing. I know there's a lot of terrible negatives with the pandemic, but one of the things it did, it got people, certainly in America, where the directives were not as tight as in the UK, where you couldn't go 5 miles or 100 yards or whatever the restrictions were of the time. You just couldn't go indoors to places. And so suddenly everybody went outdoors, and people went camping and kayaking and fishing, and fly fishing has exploded again. So fly fishing is a very good spot. And again, you pay your money and takes your choice. The downside with that is now there's 5 times as many fly fishing people on my local river as there were 2 years ago or 5 years ago. And so that gets frustrating. But the sport of fly fishing is a very healthy state. And I don't know how it will stay. when the pandemic eases and people start getting into cinemas again and gyms and bowling alleys and things like that, the numbers will drop off. They probably will. That's a natural reduction I see in the future. But I think fly fishing is a great spot. I think the gear and the tackle has made fly fishing very easy. So again, there's more participants because, again, going back to one of the earlier examples of winter steelheading, there would be an awful lot less winter steelheaders if there wasn't a Skagit line and things like Motips, because they just make it too dang easy. And so the gear's made it easy. So I think it's in a great spot. I'm really very optimistic about it. It's going the right way. There's a lot more conversations on the environment, making sure the environment's healthy. There's more conversations on correct handling of fish. And I'm passionate about people handling fish correctly. And there's more people respecting the quarry of fish and how to look after them. And I think that's all very good. I think that's all very good. So I'm a positive at heart. I always take the positive road. And so even without those, I probably think fly fishing is a good spot. But I genuinely think we're heading the right way. There's still tons to do, but I think we're heading to a greater area, a good area.
Yeah, it's one of the things I wanted you talked about, and it's interesting you talk about the social media as well and everything that goes with that. And I think, like you say, the fish handling particularly, and that's one of the things, one of the videos you did was, I guess you were fishing the Torridge. And even then, I guess that must be a good 25, 30 years ago you shot that. Your fish handling was way ahead of the curve, keeping the fish wet, keeping the fish in the water was way ahead. And, you know, it influenced people like myself and so many others to do that. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And I think you've done so much for fishing both here and in the US now as well, that I'm, you know, incredibly proud to know you, but also I hope you're proud of just what you've done for fly fishing, because it's been fantastic, Simon. It really has.
Thanks, mate. I mean, wow. I love the sport, and so if there's anything I can do to get somebody into it, I'm all about that. And so it's pretty, as I said, pretty flattering to know that I've had any influence at all, and to get asked to do things like this it's staggering to know that there's people who want to hear what about my life they want to know about. But I'm just committed to keep doing it. And again, I'm trying not to. I don't want to be a preacher. I want to be a sharer, and I just want to. I have knowledge that I've gained over the years. I've got more to learn. I know that, but if I can pass it on, then I'm going to do that in any way I possibly can. Whether it's as simple as making a line that's easier to cast for somebody to do it, or making a video, or teaching somebody, or writing a little booklet, or whatever it is. I want to share my knowledge if I can, and I don't want it to come across that I want to do this for me. This is not something for me at all. I just want people to know and enjoy this wonderful sport that's given so much to me. And so I'll keep doing that if I can.
Please do. Thank you, Simon, so much for taking the time to talk to you. It's been lovely to catch up, although be it virtually. Hopefully when we get back to some sort of normality, we'll get to catch up again soon. But thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me on the Fly Culture podcast today.
Great, mate. It's been awesome to see you. I wish it was in person. I know we talked about doing this last year in person, and sadly, Sportfish didn't happen. I think that's where we were going to record it. But I'm confident that things are going to get better, and it won't be long before I'm back in my home country, and we'll have a pint and maybe another natter then.
Fantastic. Simon, thank you so much. Everyone, this has been the Fly Culture podcast. Thank you so much for listening. As ever, there are plenty more planned, and I hope you enjoyed this one as much as I have done recording it. Thanks so much for listening.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.